Okay.
So, last time we have covered Keynesian Cross model with exogenous investment, and today we're going to discuss Keynesian Cross model with endogenous investment, and based on this model we are going to derive IS curve. So, just to recall, the main components of aggregate demand are exogenous government spending, consumption, and investment. This time endogenous. Okay, as you remember, consumption can be decomposed into autonomous consumption plus marginal propensity to consume times disposable income. So basically, what is the proportion of your disposable income you are going to spend on consuming goods and services? Disposable income is income after deducting taxes, and taxes can be decomposed into autonomous taxation item, also known as lump sum tax, and taxation rate multiplied by income. So the new equation for you is the equation for investment. Again, this time it's endogenous. That's why we assume it can be explained by this model. And it consists of some exogenous investment, or basically investment which does not depend on the level of interest rate, minus L times R. So R stands for real interest rate. When it comes to real interest rate, so there is a nominal interest rate. Interest rate you are going to get or you are going to pay to the bank or any other financial institution. So if you invest asset A, like let's say A is just initial value of your endowment, then at the end of the year you will get 1 plus interest rate, nominal interest rate times A. At the same time, you will have to account that some portion of your profit will be eaten up by inflation, when pi stands for the rate of inflation, and pi is simply percentage change in inflation. So inflation in period t stands for CPI in period t minus CPI in period t minus 1 divided by CPI in period t minus 1. So CPI stands for Consumption Price Index, and this is just some aggregate overall level of prices for consumer goods. But nevertheless, we're going to discuss it later on. So just keep in mind, CPI stands for the aggregate price level. So then your final profit will be just 1 plus R. So with some degree of simplification and assuming that rate of inflation and nominal interest rate are relatively low, you can assess real interest rate as nominal interest rate minus rate of inflation. So here we are discussing real interest rate because, as we discussed before, Keynesian model assumes that the prices are sticky, so we should not account for any change in the price level. And since everything is expressed in real terms, interest rate is expressed as real interest rate as well. So keep in mind that C1 is still smaller than 1 but bigger than 0. The same applies for the rate of taxation, and L is bigger than 0. So it's positive. So basically, if you want to analyze how investment depends on interest rate and you take the derivative for this purpose, so derivative of investment with respect to R is equal to minus L. So this simply means that there is a negative relationship between the real interest rate and amount of investment, and it can be explained simply by the fact that firms are borrowers. So as you remember, according to assumptions of circular flow model, and basically, yeah, it's the same happens in reality. Firms finance their expansion, like purchase of capital, by borrowing money from financial institutions. And interest rate is simply the cost of borrowing. So when the cost of borrowing increases, investment decreases. When cost of borrowing decreases, investment increases. So simply there is an inverse relationship between amount of investment and the value of the real interest rate. So basically here we have everything we need in order to derive aggregate demand curve. For this purpose, you simply put equations 2, 3, 4, and 5 into equation 1, and that's what you are going to get. So aggregate demand is equal to C0 plus G0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0 minus L times R plus Y times C1 times 1 minus T. Okay, as you remember, there is an equilibrium condition, so we have to add the sixth equation, which states that in equilibrium, aggregate demand is equal to aggregate output. So, technically speaking, we apply the same Keynesian Cross model. When you have aggregate demand on vertical axis, income and output on horizontal axis, so this will be the value of intercept because it does not contain any item with y. So you've got C0 plus G0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0 minus L times R. This will be the slope. Keep in mind that 1 minus T is smaller than 1, C1 is smaller than 1, so the product of these values will also be smaller than 1. So this line should be rather flat. So we applied the same trick by drawing 45 degrees line. Basically, it means that alongside this line, aggregate demand is equal to aggregate output. And this is our point of equilibrium. So in order to calculate this, you simply replace AD and income with Y star, which stands for equilibrium output, equilibrium income. Okay, I will erase it. Okay, so since AD is equal to Y or equal to Y star according to equilibrium condition, then Y star is equal to C0 plus G0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0 minus L times R plus Y star times, okay, no bracket here, times C1 times 1 minus T. So now what we have to do is just to simplify this. So if you do it correctly, you should get the following solution. So Y star times 1 minus C1 times 1 minus T should be equal to C0 plus G0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0 minus L times R. And finally, Y star should be equal to C0 plus G0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0 minus L times R multiplied by 1 over 1 minus C1 times 1 minus T. Okay, so we've got this. This will be the value of output in equilibrium according to Keynesian Cross model. And technically, we're not that interested in this. So honestly, what we're going to do is to derive IS curve, which is simply function of real interest rate of the level of output. Okay, I will explain this in a second. So we solved this. We do not need it anymore at this point. Okay, so what you have to do is to express R as the function of real output. So LR is going to be equal to, give me a, okay, yes, okay, just 1 second. Yeah, sorry. So it should be equal to C0 plus G0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0 minus 1 minus C1 times 1 minus T times Y. Sorry, I thought I made a mistake, but it's actually fine. Yeah, so you put this, you take this from the right side of equation to the left side of equation. So you change the sign. The same applies to this item. So as you remember, this part is called autonomous demand. And this is just the component of aggregate demand, which does not depend on the level of income. So one final step is to divide both sides by L. So finally you will get R is equal to C0 plus G0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0, okay, divided by L minus 1 minus C1 times 1 minus T divided by L times Y. Okay, so here is the formula for IS curve, as simple as it is. So IS curve will stand for equilibrium on the market of goods. So equilibrium on the market of goods means that aggregate demand is equal to aggregate output. So IS curve will just represent all the possible combinations of real interest rate and real output, which result in equilibrium on the market of goods, which means that aggregate demand is equal to aggregate output at any point of the IS curve. Okay, so this is something we're going to analyze later. So I will keep it. Not really. Okay, no problem. So by the way, this is C1, just in case it's not really clear. Okay. So, equation of IS curve is that R is equal to G0 plus C0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0 divided by L minus 1 minus C1 times 1 minus T divided by L multiplied by Y. Yeah. Okay, so keep in mind that 1 minus T is smaller than 1. C1 times 1 minus T will be smaller, smaller than 1, of course, will be smaller than 1. So 1 minus C1 times 1 minus T will be bigger than 0. So this means that we have the ordinary form of any linear function when y is equal to b minus ax, where a is bigger than 0. So this function is going to have a negative slope, and this is the only thing we are interested at this point. Okay, so we have R on vertical axis, output on horizontal axis. This will be the value of intercept, as we discussed before. So this is simply B in our linear function. It does not contain any Y item. So the value will be just G0 plus C0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0 multiplied by 1 over L. We have it. The function will have negative slope, as we have discussed before. And the value of this function when interest rate is equal to 0, you can check this, will be just y will be equal to G0 plus C0 plus I0 minus C1 times T0 divided by 1 minus C1 times 1 minus T. So basically this is just an equilibrium level of GDP when we assume that interest rate is equal to 0 and R times L is equal to 0 subsequently. So technically speaking, we have it. So now when you have this function, you can simply analyze how its position and slope is going to be affected by changes in fundamental macroeconomic variables. So let's say, for instance, we decided to analyze what will happen to this equilibrium when government decides to increase government spending. You can check. So it will not affect the value of slope, which is fine. It will only affect the value of intercept. So when G0 is going to increase, the value of this intercept will be bigger. So it will just result in a kind of parallel shift of this function. So trust me, it should be parallel. I'm just not really good in drawing. Yeah. Analogously, what is going to happen when government... Okay, whatever. It's not about government. What is going to happen when C1 increases? So let's say that households just become more optimistic about the future. So they decide to spend bigger proportion out of their income and marginal propensity to consume increases. So in this case, absolute value of the slope 1 minus C1 times 1 minus T will decrease and the function will become flatter on one hand. So function will be flatter. On the other hand, it will shift down because you've got item minus C1 times T0 in the value of intercept. So it will shift down, it will become flatter. And so on and so forth. So, yeah, I believe that's it when it comes to a very basic idea behind the IS curve. Just keep in mind that this is not the end of the story. It is a part of a SLM model. And LM curve will be discussed in the next tutorial when we start analyzing money market. So that's it. Thank you for attention.